So one topic people love to bring up all the time, and I think it's probably the most natural question to ask, is what's the recipe for success? How can they make their account successful? And I've always felt like this is a difficult question to answer sometimes, because I think they're often operating from in their mind, they're equating this to something like Google Ads. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're imagining some dashboard or framework where there's buttons and levers, things I can change on a regular basis to hone in on better performance.
Yeah.
And so that's a difficult thing to transition them into a different paradigm where, I don't know, to get better performance, you can't do that. It's almost like you have to do it from the outside in. So what types of things would you say to them are the keys to influencing from the outside in?
Are we talking like relationships? Or no, what am I thinking? Are we talking about like radius and reviews?
So radius comes up as it's almost like, I think they fall into two categories. There's what you can change, or there's technical issues that you can change with settings. And then there's things where you are being evaluated by Google, and the only way you can change them is through your behavior, the things you do through each call. Each call becomes cemented into your history, and you're being judged, and future performance depends on past performance.
Yeah.
So what are the types of behaviors and things that they can do going forward to try to influence that?
If we're talking behaviors within the company, then phone answering, I think, is the biggest one. You want someone, whenever your ads are live, whatever hours you set within your LSA, you want them answering calls within that time. And you want those calls answered in 30 seconds or less. If there's a missed call, if a call goes unanswered, it shouldn't happen. Ideally, that would never happen. Considering how it dings your phone responsiveness score, you should be opening the app, trying to call those callers back, try to recoup a little bit of the loss you incur from those missed calls. Other things they can do, I would say soliciting reviews is another one. That's something you can't really do from a management standpoint outside the firm.
Yeah.
It's something within the firm that they're going to have to push for.
This idea or this notion of being scored on your responsiveness, this is another one of those areas that I think is tough for people to get their head around. Because on the surface, I can tell a client, you're being judged. They're evaluating your responsiveness. And like the lens through which they see the world, they're going to see responsiveness as, well, why wouldn't we already be doing that? So they're going to, oftentimes, like the most common answer I hear is, yeah, we answer the phone all the time.
Yeah.
But we see on the other side of that, we see Google's evaluation of them. Mm-hmm. We see missed calls. We see low responsive scores. And it's oftentimes hard to get them to really understand that, like, you might have a standard for your own company. But if you want to get leads from LSA, your standard isn't relevant, Google's is. And so you can't change the nature of their standard. You're just gonna have to figure out how to live up to it.
Yeah.
And for me, what I've observed so far is I think that the ideal situation would be that you have a dedicated line for LSAs separate from where all your other calls go. And that dedicated line gets routed to a live answer that is going to be picked up by a human being in 2 rings or less.
Yeah.
And that it will not ever be greeted by a recording, a phone tree, an IVR, any kind of automated, like you never want an LSA call to run into some kind of menu or anything other than a human being saying, hey, this is our law firm and how can we help? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. I think it's important for firms to consider that while their intake may be perfectly adequate for a normal day-to-day type thing, when it comes to Google, like you said, you're playing the game.
Yeah.
So you have to play their game by their rules and kind of out of your head about their own personal standards and feeling defensive of those. Because those missed calls that come in, sure, they could be spam. You still have to call them back.
Yeah. Now, there is a problem that we've noticed with Google. And seemingly, just based on the data, there are a certain amount of calls that seem to come in that are marked, but that we can't really track them down and find them in, say, a CRM or a call tracking system or whatever. They'll oftentimes just show up either in the Google dashboard under the new category, and they'll say missed, or alternatively, sometimes we have access to more data on the back end of our systems, right? And a lot of times you'll just see a discrepancy or a gap between total calls and what Google calls connected calls.
Yeah.
And that gap oftentimes is just being counted as missed calls. And there's this score that they have that they call their phone lead responsiveness. And it seems like that gap, those number of missed calls, is probably being counted against your overall score.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to how it's a game that you're playing. Because I don't think any person would really call those missed calls. Calls that are never connected, you don't stand a chance. But you still have to play the game. You still have to call them back.
Yeah. It's interesting. For the longest time, I wondered why Google would tell us that your score goes up if you call back a missed call.
Yeah.
I spent weeks trying to figure out in my head, how in the world would Google know? And there's part of me that wears a tinfoil hat that thought, like, maybe they do. Maybe they actually know when I called somebody back somehow.
Yeah.
But then we were watching a YouTube video and somebody else was talking about using the app to call back missed calls. And it's like, that was a big light bulb moment for me, realizing, oh, duh. If you use the app, and maybe that's their assumption, is that's just a natural inclination for every client or user to go download the app and utilize it on a day-to-day basis. My experience has been that probably only about less than 5% of users are using the app, but maybe they see something different on the retail side.
Yeah, you know what I would think is that when it comes to local service ads, it really seems like it was developed for other verticals. So something like maybe an independent handyman contractor or something, I could see them using their phone to help track and manage those leads. But for something like an injury law firm where managing their leads is the last of their worries, I can see why that's something that would go.
Yeah, I love that. Oftentimes the way I refer to that aspect of the platform is I'll tell people that you have engineers designing a product and they're going to have a particular paradigm that they look at when they're making that thing. I think that it's not a coincidence that they started out with home services as their original niche.
Yeah.
And as a result, much of the language and categories and options within their dashboard are relevant specifically to home services. And so then when you go into a new service like law, you're looking at it going, nobody in an injury law firm has a booked appointment. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it is part of Google's process and the naming conventions in their dashboard.
Yeah.
So I think that also somewhat relates back to this whole idea of just playing the game. You just got to figure out that, oh, perhaps that's one of the things they're measuring. So I realize we don't book appointments, but if we did, what would that look like?
Yeah, and I don't think it's unrealistic to say that some of those kind of leftover artifacts from it being rolled out for home services initially, that those won't be like corrected and fixed, because we've even seen from when we started, they were asking for background checks for lawyers, they were asking for proof of insurance, and those things have all disappeared from the dashboard. Now, I remember one was the lawyer license expiration date.
Yeah.
And that's gone now, which is good because it made no sense whatsoever. So they're definitely keeping an eye on it. They're definitely adapting it to the different niches and verticals. So I don't know, it's something that's always changing, I think.
So trying to be what they can do to be successful, make sure your settings in the beginning are all correct. And one of the most easily overlooked aspects of that, I think, is if you have more than one listing, having your targeting overlap.
Yeah. I know initially they didn't seem to be enforcing that, but I think we've seen as recently as, what was it, October?
Yeah.
Any overlap can cause severe penalties for both accounts. So
meaning you're going to drop in leads, phone calls.
Yeah, you're ranking everything.
Yeah.
They really don't want your boundaries overlapping, even if it's just a single neighborhood or zip code.
Now we have an unfair advantage in that regard because our Google rep will tell us, hey, I noticed.
Yeah, she'll notify us.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that connection, if you're not on that higher tier of LSA support, is there any way you can be notified of that, or are you just going to have to go manually?
I'm sure you could probably call support and they might be able to tell you, but it really comes down to just manually checking. It's zooming way in on that map, comparing between accounts. It's pretty tedious. It's pretty time consuming. And to adjust your targeting can be a real handful, considering it includes zip codes, cities, counties, everything.
Oh, so you could inadvertently overlap your targeting even though you tried not to.
Yeah.
So give me a scenario in which that might happen.
If you already had pre-existing targeting and like you're hearing this and you're thinking to yourself, oh no, I have overlapping targeting, I need to go get this corrected. Let's say you just delete every zip code from your LSA listing and then you only put in the zip codes you want. If you didn't make sure you removed the cities and the counties as well, you could still have that overlapping targeting. You would have to remove absolutely everything before.
And then start clean.
Start clean.
Interesting. So technically, getting all your settings correct, your targeting, your so on and so forth. What about the completion of all your profile? There's pictures.
Yeah.
There's options about, do you have like free Wi-Fi parking?
Yeah. How many years in business? Like little badges almost you can add to the profile. Yeah.
Okay. So those show up as like a featured.
Yeah, like a little featured section to help you. I don't think it really helps with LSA rankings, but for the client-facing side, it's nice to see. It helps you stand out from your competitors.
So from a conversion standpoint. Okay. And then externally, reaching out on a regular basis to get good reviews. What happens if you get a bad one?
So they put you in a 60-day sandbox. Essentially, your account performance is just dinged for up to 60 days. Google really likes that. They really like having this huge time period of penalization, essentially. Like when it comes to your phone response score, that's calculated on a 90-day scale. So if you have a really bad responsiveness score, it could take you a full 90 days to get out of that. Likewise, with a 1-star review, it'll take 60 days for you to come back out of that penalty window. And in the meantime, the best thing you can do is solicit additional 5-star reviews. When you see a 1-star review come through, that's really when you should be putting the pedal to the metal and trying to get those 5-star reviews at all costs.
Finally, let's talk about responsiveness. So answering the phone, ideally under 2 rings by a person, never having any kind of automation or voicemail or anything like that. What would you say to somebody who's had issues with that in the past, but they want to improve upon it going forward? What are things they could do?
It depends on, I would say, their phone response score, where they're sitting. If someone's at a 0.05 phone response score, it's probably best to just scrap it and start over. But if you're somewhere around like a 0.3 or 0.4, I think that's something that can be rehabilitated. The difficult thing is you wouldn't know what that phone response score is unless you're pulling from the API. And so that requires getting kind of software developers to go in, figure out how to pull that data, present it to you in a readable format. But if someone is in that 0.3, 0.4 range where their score could be rehabilitated, like we said, the phone needs to be answered in 30 seconds or less by a human being. You want to make sure every single missed call you receive is called back. If you have message leads toggled on, the sooner you can respond to them, the better, but it has to be in 24 hours or less.
Cool. I think that pretty much covers all the things you would do to get the most out of your LSA.
Yeah.
I would say that there are some other things that are speculative and somewhat unproven. I know that and maybe we'll make a whole video out of this particular topic, like rumors and myths, but these are the things that I think are confirmed. We've seen it. We've had Google confirm it for us.
Yep.
And we've seen other agencies and other parties confirm these things.
Yep.
So I think they're pretty tried and tested.